undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system.
As South Africa confronts Angola over the future of Namibia.
What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems.
A bush conflict where guerrilla skirmishes are developing fast into open warfare.
Small as we are, and with what we've got, we will defend this country to the last man.
What if I told you that South Africa fought a bloody and twisted war that spanned over 20 years, and most people, including South Africans, do not even know about it? Just secrets, propaganda, and thousands of young men sent into the bush to fight a war the South African state doesn't like to talk about to this day. This is the South African Bush War. Unlike most wars, the South African Border War, also known as the Bush War, had no clear front lines. There were no decisive victories, no grand declarations. It unfolded through ambushes in the desert of northern Namibia, landmines along dusty roads, and surprise airstrikes in long, exhausting patrols through the scorched, hostile terrain. It was a war fought not just with bullets, but with fear, confusion, and propaganda. And in many ways, it was as much a psychological war as it was a physical one. At the heart of South Africa's military effort was the SADF, the South African Defence Force. Its strength came from conscriptions. Thousands of young, white South African men, mainly only 18 or 19 years old, were pulled, often forcefully, from school or university and sent to the front lines in northern Namibia and southern Angola. Most of them barely understood what they were fighting for. They had grown up under Apartheid's tight control over information. They were fed stories about communist threats and terrorists coming from the north. To them, the war often felt distant, confusing, and endless. For many of these conscripts, the Bush War became a defining and haunting experience. Long after the war stopped, the psychological scars remained. Nightmares built and silence followed them home. As a side note, people of color could serve with the SADF, but under restricted and segregated conditions. White men were forced to serve, whereas black, colored, and Indian South Africans could volunteer, but were mainly limited to support roles such as being drivers, cooks, mechanics, or local defense units. Combat and command positions were almost entirely white. There were exceptions though, such as the Southwest African Territorial Force, SWATF, which sometimes deployed black soldiers to operational zones, but promotion and recognition were very rare. It reflected apartheid's racial hierarchy. Even in war, the system insisted on maintaining the illusion of white supremacy. On the other side stood PLAN, the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, the armed wing of SWAPO. PLAN understood that they could not defeat South Africa in open combat. Instead, they turned to guerrilla warfare, small, mobile units striking quickly before disappearing into the ambush. They laid ambushes, blew up supply routes, and planned landmines designed to spread fear and disrupt. Landmines were among the most dreaded weapons of the war, killing soldiers, civilians, and livestock long after the battles ended. Plan's goal was never outright victory on the battlefield. Their aim was endurance, to survive, to persist, and to make the occupation too costly to sustain. South Africa's response was to create highly trained counterinsurgency units, the most feared and revered, as well as controversial of them, was the 32 Battalion, also known as the Buffalo Battalion. Formed in 1975 by Colonel Jan Breitenbach, it was composed mostly of black Angolan soldiers who had fought against the Marxist MPLA during the Angolan Civil War, now reassembled under South African command, which were led by white officers. 32 Battalion specialized in deep penetration raids, reconnaissance, and intelligence missions, often far beyond South Africa's borders. They pushed Plan fighters into southern Angola. But the unit's legacy is deeply divided. Praised by some for their skill and discipline, but condemned by others for their brutality in ethical grey zones that they operated in. They blurred the lines between soldier and mercenary, between war and human rights abuse. Even till this day, their story stirs strong emotions, remembered as heroes by some, but remembered as traitors by others. In the 1970s and 80s came perhaps the most unexpected participant in the Bush War, Cuba. Under Fidel Castro, Cuba sent tens of thousands of troops to Angola to support the MPLA government, turning what had once been a low-level guerrilla conflict into one of the most significant proxy wars of the Cold War. At its peak, over 50,000 Cuban soldiers were stationed in Angola, the largest overseas deployment in Cuba's history. Their reasons for joining were complex, but included ideological solidarity with socialist movements, opposition to Western and apartheid-backed interventions, and a commitment to anti-colonial struggles across Africa. The result was staggering. A small border conflict exploded into a full-scale conventional war, involving tanks, artillery, and jet fighters. The Angolan skies filled with MiGs and Mirage jets, and suddenly a regional war became a global one.